I was really, when I saw you say, what topic and maybe myths, I was like, oh, this is a perfect time of year to talk about myths, right? Um, we shouldn't talk about politics, but they're there, right? And then there's Thanksgiving and all the mythology about that first meal, right? New books come out, or at least relatively new, that's got all the details about what that first Thanksgiving meal might have been about, And then there's Christmas, and we've got all these secular ideas about how we celebrate the season, and they kind of overtake any actual history or reality. We get like fully enmeshed in the mythology of Elf on a Shelf. I should say that quietly in case there's anyone listening who might believe that mythology.
None present here. You're good.
Okay. But even like the three magi, that's a mythology. The numbers aren't anywhere there in the Bible. But I think that even those myths, people might think about a myth as being a lie. But in religious terms, mythology just refers to the sacred stories of a religion. And you can think about myths as something that may have never happened, but they're always happening, right? So Romeo and Juliet, they're like great examples of mythology because they probably never lived, did they? And yet the wrong people fall in love all the time, right? We have that phrase star-crossed lovers for a reason. It's not just two people, it's, so many people. So the Bible doesn't tell us there's three magi, but three is a great number, right? It's 2 or 3 for witnesses, but 2 could conspire. So 3 is the perfect number where you'll get the truth. Like why we hit 3 myths about women's ministries, So I thought with all that kind of mythology that we're all living with, it'd really be interesting, to me at least, I hope to some of the rest of you out there who are listening, to look at some myths about women's ministries. On one level, they might be lies or at least wrong, but maybe there's some deeper truth that we could uncover here in a minute or two that might be helpful. So the first one, myth number 1, is there aren't many women in the Bible. You've heard that, I imagine.
Just asinine to even hear you say.
But people do think it, And last year, the women who were in that first cohort for Women's Ministries program, they were amazed at how many women there were. And I think at least for me, at my age, I've always heard that. There aren't many women in the Bible. The Bible was written by men, for men, about men. And I think that a lot of people hear that and they believe it and maybe don't like it, but still don't know just how rich the study of women in Scripture is. That first cohort was just astonished at how many women there are in the Bible that they had never heard of before. But like I said, I think sometimes myths have deeper truths to them. And I think that what came out in those conversations was kind of the reason why we don't know how many women there are in the Bible. And that's a deeper truth than about the lectionary, because we sort of believe the myth that the lectionary covers the whole Bible, and yet it doesn't. And a lot of women's stories never show up in the lectionary. We know that about Mary and Elizabeth, right? In the Advent season, we hear Gabriel tell Mary that Elizabeth's pregnant, but almost all of Elizabeth's story is left out of the lectionary. In Luke 1, there's 80 verses, and 58 of those verses are either about Mary or about Elizabeth and the pregnancies, or quotes from them. And only 17 of those verses ever show up in the lectionary. The second myth, I think, builds on that. It's the reason I started off with a myth about women in the Bible as opposed to a myth about women's ministries. And that's that the myth is that women don't need to know about women in Scripture, or they don't need to know about theology around women. They don't have to have any special women's ministries. Men and women are all the same. And I bring this one up because it's personal to me. I think that hanging around in the back of my mind as I was planning this program was that, the gender divide's not as big as it was, right? What existed between men and women in my parents' generation or my generation, it is, what's now going on is not nearly as broad as it was. The gender binary isn't nearly as broad either, right? But I also know that I've been seeing in this pandemic that we sure have not entirely spanned that. In households where there are two gendered parents, women are still taking on the primary child care roles, and women are giving up their employment to do that in much larger numbers than the men are doing. So while there's plenty of opportunities for non-gendered ministries in the churches, there are still places for gendered ministries. For ministries for those who consider themselves to be women, and ministries with those who consider themselves to be men. And I hear the men cheering on men's ministries. I see that in a lot of my courses, and I'm amazed at the work that those men are doing to lead those. Why aren't we as enthusiastic about having women's ministries as we are about the churches that have men's ministries going on? I'm sorry.
That's so refreshing to hear you bust that myth, because I personally sometimes feel the pressure of, is it not okay for me to support and want gendered ministries? So it's on a personal level. That's so refreshing to hear that second myth busted.
Good. And it took a while for me to work through that myself, because that's equality for all, but equal doesn't mean you can't be separate and have two equal things that you're going to do individually for yourself. Something that's important and powerful. I don't know that we've ever gotten to the place yet where we communicate equally, and I think that's what I hear a lot from the men's ministries, that they're successful when there's a form of communication that works, and maybe for women too, it's a different kind of communication. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I also think that, and this may be the deeper truth underneath the myth, that we really want equality, right? We really want equality among genders, much like racism. We want sexism to go away. And yet the question is, are we willing to work to make that happen? And I think that this Women's Ministries program is a place for starting that work. We start by saying, let's base ministries firmly in the lives and the ministries of women in the Bible and in the theology about women in Christianity, which has changed over time. And let's get that foundation, and then begin to look at the work that needs to be done and how can we move on in doing that. And go ahead.
Yeah. One way, if I remember right, and I know we'll get to this in a second, because I don't want to distract from the third myth, but while we're here, am I remembering right that in the practical ministry certification, or maybe I'm thinking of your Christian women mystics course, but I think you do it in both, but you take course participants and certification earners back to the original, the biblical manuscripts in their original language, and you go back and see how many of the names we've changed that were women, or how many times there was originally a woman's name there and the name was taken out altogether. Am I right in that? That's part of the.
I don't know that it's formal, although we're definitely using a book for the women in the Hebrew scriptures, where the author does her own translations, and so gets back to that. And that's probably what you're remembering.
That's
some
right,
of that language. Yeah. And we're also talking about Paul's letters, and in there's a place where the woman's name was changed to be a man's name for a while, for a long while in history.
Was it Junius?
Yes.
I feel like
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Her name's Junia, and they changed it to Junius. Yeah.
Oh, well, I did not mean to steal the thunder. What is the third myth? I can't wait.
Well, just the third myth is that women's ministries are so old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when we were talking about doing this program and was it needed, is this something that's needed? when I looked at some of the websites, you'd think you were still in the 1950s. Women's ministries are having dinners and fashion shows. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I moved into a parsonage one time, and up in the attic, I found this pile of hat boxes. There were dozens of hat boxes, and they were filled with what had probably a long time before been really beautiful hats, right? Really elaborate things. And I asked some of I think in the SPRC, I said, what in the world are these hats doing in the attic, right? And she said, oh, they were the women's group. They used to do a hat show every year. And oh, wow, the times have changed, but the hats remain, And I have to say, you could have fun with a hat show. You could have fun with a dinner or a fashion show or anything like that. It could be fun, but it's not what women's ministries are about today. And just when I listened to what the women in that cohort from 2020 were talking about and what they've been talking about all year, people were discussing their ministries in nursing homes, leading Bible studies, preaching, working with victims of the sex slave trade, leading anti-racism workshops, facing up to domestic partner abuse among people in their congregation. I mean, the range of topics that women's ministry encompasses is massive, and the congregation that can help to nurture these ministries can reach out in support of women in their whole community and uplift the whole community with that. And I think that the deeper truth that's underneath that myth that they're old-fashioned is what I've really touched on already. Right now in the midst of this pandemic, we need to provide some support to women and as individuals and as parts of families and communities. The pandemic is so negatively affecting women, immigrants, the poor, people of color. We have got to step up our ministries and move towards this better society for all people to live in. And I couldn't help thinking that Mary and Elizabeth actually got together, right? And they're comparing their pregnancies, and they might have been envisioning this kingdom that their children could bring about in terms of justice for all people, not just for some. So I hope that this program, this certificate program, is just a little piece of that. And I absolutely can't wait for January and the next group to get started.
Yes. And January 18th is the day for our friends that are watching this live with us now or the replay. This will be the second cohort. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Second cohort. I cut you off.
Go ahead. That's all right.
This is the second cohort of practical ministry certification in women's ministries. It's accredited. It is a year long. It's pay as you go. There's 4 6-week classes. We take breaks in between the classes, and then we take off during crazy busy holidays. Mm-hmm. And Beth is one of the amazing thought leaders, amazing pastors that you get to learn from and with. And then there are others as well that join her in teaching. So I know that I'm probably forgetting something exciting about this opportunity. So what else do we need to know, Beth?
Well, I guess I'd just say, because somebody had asked about time commitment, and I saw your email, and that's great, like about an hour and a half a day. I think it's probably pretty good. But we still aren't out of this pandemic, right? And a lot of us, I mean, when things started in the spring, it was me here in New York City that was in the worst of the turmoil, right? But now it's spread everywhere, and I think that that we're going to be a while until we know exactly what's happening next. And so we found that last year there had to be some flexibility, and there had to be some awareness of the stress level we're all living with. And I think that certainly we have pretty high standards. There's it's in-depth reading, and there's strong assignments, and people to interview in your congregation, and papers to write, and all sorts of fun things. But there's also grace. And I think that's important for everybody to know right now.
Yes. And am I right in stating that if someone cannot earn the practical ministry certification in women's ministry, that's a mouthful. If
Yes.
someone can't earn that in order, take the 4 courses in order, that is okay.
Yeah, that's okay. It may be that you'll be okay for the first session, and then maybe the second, your time schedule doesn't work out. The next year, when it comes around again, you can jump back in. Yeah, as long as you let us know quick enough in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
People got to stay in touch.
Mm-hmm. So for our friends that are watching this, if the 3 myths about women's ministries that Beth busted in this video, if it spoke to your heart, that you were happy to see those myths busted, then head on down below this video. We're going to put a link to the certification program. You can explore it further, and just think, January of 2022, you would have earned a practical certification in women's ministries.
Yay! Hooray!
Hooray! Well, if anyone has any questions, tag me below in the comments, and I will connect you with Beth's email. Does that feel like
that
a
sounds great? Yep, that'd be wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth.
Sure thing. Thank you, Meg. Always great to see you.